Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple, the show where we talk about all things board game related. It's not too often that I am personally surprised by a game, but this is one of those such games. It's called Exodus Fleet. It's from TMG Games, and I had no idea this one was coming out. In fact, I didn't even know the game existed.
You didn't hear about it until Gen Con, right?
I didn't even hear about it until after Gen Con. In fact, it showed up on our front porch. It is an Essen title, and I think a lot of reviewers have got it early, and we had a chance to play it. Each player is representing part of a communal fleet that is exiting the Earth.
Yeah, and there's a lot of bidding going on in this too, which I wasn't prepared for the amount of bidding that goes on here, and it's a really good balance of bidding. It brings in that sort of James Bond, like outbidding, even if you're going to lose.
Right. Let me talk to you about the backstory. There has been a nuclear winter on Earth, and all of these different factions are now coming together to explore the galaxy.
Yeah, basically get out of
get out of town. And what they're doing is they're going across the Earth and getting different tribes to join their fleet. So the idea is that each player represent a specific portion of the same fleet, trying to recruit new tribe members or the remaining humanity on Earth to explore the galaxy together. Each player, this is really cool, each player is going to start with one of these different player boards. Now on the player board, it will tell you how many players this particular player board is associated with, and that's important because the actions become a little bit different depending if you're playing with a 2-player count or with a 5-player count in the game.
Yeah, but all of the boards effectively are the same when you're playing the game, aside from the artwork.
Yeah.
The differences come in based on the board that you choose. You get to select one of 2 starting faction ships that give a lot of sort of variable player powers for sure.
Right, so across the top of your player board, it will tell you one of 2 command ships that you will be using. So at the start of the game, each player is going to draw their 2 command ships. In this instance, it's planning and trade. They're going to look at those 2 command ships, and these command ships will give you a variety of different types of options on them and variable powers, as well as storage and the amount of tribe members that they can hold. So they're going to look at these powers and say, well, I think I want to go with this one for this particular game. Not only does it give you those powers, but it's also going to give you one very particular starting Explorer cards. These Explorer cards give you one-time benefits through the course of the game. They're all unique powers, but every one can be traded in for a resource at any given time.
Yeah, and they oftentimes synergize very well with that starting command ship you choose. The interesting thing about this is if the first, maybe even the second time you play this, you're going to be looking at these starting command ships and going, I don't know.
Yeah.
But once you get into the game really quickly, like they all work really well. They're all pretty well balanced, so it adds a lot of flavor.
Yep. Also at the start of the game, each player will collect an X amount of XUs, which are the money in this case. They go in denominations of 1, 3, 5, and 10. And you will always collect money according to whatever your command ship allows, plus any other ships that you will have in your fleet. So in this case, I would start with 7 XU at the start of the game. Also, each player is going to start with a certain number of resources. Now, the resources in the game, there's 4 different types of resources, and there are the tribes member, which are your purple people. The resources are like metal and fuel and biomass and water, and you'll be having to collect these and store them physically on the ships that you have, making sure that you don't overflow your ships.
Yeah, that's a big part of the balance in this game is having enough storage for things, because oftentimes those starting ships, you'll go out, and one of the actions we'll get to in a second is mining. You'll go out there and mine, and you might realize right away, I don't even have enough space for all of the things I mined just now.
Right.
So you start to realize that you're going to have to slowly build up your ships. Of course, to buy those ships, you're going to have to use things that you mine. So it's kind of a slow move to build that fleet, and then it really starts going.
Right. Also, you're going to start with a number of planets that will be available to be mined through the course of the game. The one on the far right just shows the current planet that can be mined with 3 levels of mining. There's a future planet and then a far future planet, so you can kind of get an understanding of when you might want to take a mining action, when you might want to wait for a mining action. Anything that's mined will go to the discard. Also, you have the round track. Now, this is really cool. Depending upon the number of players, it tells you how long the game is going to be. We have a 3-player game set up, so it's going to be 11 rounds with a scoring round during the 6th and 11th round. So no matter how many players are playing, you're always going to have 2 scoring rounds.
Yeah, and it's really cool. You look at this time track, if you will, and they've got numbers all over this thing for 4 players, for 5 players, for 2 players. So it really evidences that they gave a lot of thought in terms of scaling this thing for whatever player count you might have.
Also, at the bottom of the main board, you have all the different scoring actions. We'll get into this in a moment. Below the board, you're going to set up 2 different sets of ships that can be recruited into your fleet. The top portion are faction ships. There's a variety of different faction ships in the game. They will give you victory points during scoring, but they'll also give you abilities throughout the course of the game. They hold storage and other type of variable powers. Below that, you have neutral buildings. These have no faction, but they give you some really cool scoring opportunities during the scoring rounds.
Yeah, a lot of the neutral ships have the end of game scoring things going on. The cool thing about the faction ships is, like Jeremy said, there is a set collection aspect to those. So if you create some synergies in your fleet, if you will, with a lot of the same faction, you can really score a lot of points during those scoring turns.
So the game works like this. It is incredibly simple to play. There are 5 actions that you can take on your turn. At the start of the game, you designate one player as the start player. Every time the turn gets back around to him, you're going to move the round track forward. But everybody during a round has the chance to become the admiral. The admiral makes the calls on what's going to happen that particular round. What you can do is this. If you are the admiral, you will get the admiral card. That designates that you are the admiral player for that round. You get to pick one of these 5 different actions that are on the player board. There's income, which allows everybody at the table to collect income. There's mining, which will allow you to go to the mining place to collect resources. There's transporters, which will allow you to grab these different tribes and put them onto your board. There's builders, which will allow you to accumulate more fleet. And then there's explorers, which will allow you to explore and get more explorer cards.
Yeah.
However, this is how it works. Everybody participates, no matter who is the admiral. But the bidding portion is the really, really meat and potatoes of this game, and it's one of the coolest aspects.
Yeah, so the way this works is the admiral's going to declare, for instance, we're going to do mining or miners. And then starting with the player to the admiral's left, the bidding begins.
Yeah.
So this XU that you're going to be collecting, and you can keep that private, you're going to place down in turn order the amount of money you want to bid. And this is open information. So Jeremy might put down $3. If he was the person to the left of the admiral, the cool thing about being the admiral is you get the last opportunity to make the bid.
Yep.
So sometimes you want the high bid, sometimes you might not. Like for instance, in mining, the highest bid's going to get a certain layer on the card of the resources. But you actually might want the bottom layer of resources. You might have some cards that suggest if you come in second place during a bid, you get this.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of really cool things going on to make the bidding really, really interesting. So if he bids 3, maybe the next guy bids 4, then it comes back to the admiral. He could bid 5, or he could say, you know what, that's too rich for my blood. You guys can go ahead and I'll save my money for the next bid.
Let's talk a little bit about bidding. When you bid, you can bid any amount as the starting player. The next player has to bid higher or lower than that number. You cannot bid the same number that a previous player in the round has bid. Now, as David said, when you win, there's 2 different things that can happen. If you are the first player in that bid to win, you're going to look at that action card and see which level you won. If you're first player, you get some action. If you're second player, you get an action. And then if you're last player, you get an action. Now, there's the opposite. If you lose or you choose not to bid at all, you can simply pass. Anytime you lose a bid, or if you pass, you always get 4 XU and a free resource of your choice to place upon one of your fleet. That's not always the case, but it's typically the case for every single one of these actions, unless you're playing a 5-player game. Some of those actions, if you lose, you get nothing.
Yeah, and that's nice because in most cases, like Jeremy said, unless you're playing a 5-player game, you're always going to get a little bit of something, and that extra XU really helps for the next bid. This game is about pacing significantly.
Yeah.
If you're low on money and you lose a bid, they're going to spend their money. You're going to get a little bit more money. So when it comes back around to you, or maybe even before it comes back to you, you might be able to make a big move to win a bid that someone else thought they were going to win.
That's right. So when the actions are done and everyone's done that particular action for that round, that player will pass the admiral marker over to the next player. That player will then choose one of those 5 actions, with the only caveat being that they cannot choose the same action that the previous admiral had chosen. So in this case, that player cannot do the mining action. When they're done, it's going to pass to the next player. Whenever the admiral marker gets back to the start player, this will move forward to the next round. And you're just going to keep doing that round after round until you get to a scoring portion in the game. So Once we get to at the end of round 6 in a 3-player game, we're going to score. Scoring is very simple. You're going to score in the first scoring round 2 points for every single one of the tribe's members that you've recruited and placed onto one of your fleet. The second thing that's going to happen is you're going to look at your neutral ships. Every single neutral ship in the game has a different variable to what they score.
Yeah, and some of them are just straight up, this ship is worth 3 points, but others have more of an end game or mid game in this case sort of scoring factor where you're going to look at how many resources. You get this many points for this many ships, things like that. So lots of typical end of game scoring things can come into play mid game and at the end of the game.
You're also going to score for all the ships of a particular faction that you have. So if you have 4 ships of one particular faction, you score 8 points. If you have 5, you score 12 points. You're going to look at all the faction ships that you have and count those points out. That's the end of the round, and then you go again until you get to the end of the second round. Tribes will be worth 3 points at that portion, and you score it out, and that's the end of the game. It's a very simple game to play. It's very quick to play. A lot of the meat of the game comes in how you bid, when you bid, and the actions of the fleet that you acquire into your tableau.
Yeah, this thing, you want to get to the review?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
It's clear that we both like this game for sure. There's a lot of engine building going on. There's a lot of interesting things you can do where you're grabbing these cards. We haven't talked too much about the Explorer cards.
Sure.
But those Explorer cards really bring in a lot of flavor. Sometimes you can just discard them from an extra resource or use them to get 4 of any one resource when you need them in a pinch. But there are some neutral ships that really trigger off some of those Explorer cards too, which make it even more interesting. So you can build these little private engines that no one knows about with those Explorer cards and make for some points, unexpected points from the perspective of your competitors.
Right, not just the abilities that David was talking to, but the bidding aspect. We can't not talk about the bidding aspect in this game. I'm not a huge auction bidding gamer. In this case, it is awesome for the simple fact that when you're at the Admiral, you are in the prime position to choose what you want to do. You can look around the table. All the bids are open, however the amount of money they have is closed. You don't know what people have. So you can position yourself for a really strong turn as long as the player before you doesn't take the action that you're wanting to take on that particular turn. And even when you lose a bid, it's not the worst case scenario in the world. You get money and you get resources to place on your ship to be able to use for a future action.
And in fact, I would say losing the bid sometimes can be one of the most satisfying aspects of the game. There are times, now this is a risky thing to do, where someone to my right is the Admiral, I'm the first to bid. I know I don't even want that action right now. I don't need it. I know the other 2 guys really want it.
Yes.
9XU.
Yeah.
So they're basically going to have to spend 10 or 11 XU. I get all my money back and another 4XU, so I'm in really good position. Now, that did come back to burn me once, where I did that, and everyone was like, no, okay, you can have it. So I lost all my money for an action that I didn't really want. So there's a lot of fun risk being taken in the bidding process.
There's some really awesome ships too that allow you to not even have to bid in some cases to take a particular action. If someone wants to take the, say for instance, the Explorer action, and you have a card that allows you to take that action without placing a bid by paying an X amount of money regardless, those type of things are awesome because you can start building these really crafty engines to change your fleet and to change the dynamics of how you approach and how you try to acquire different things.
Yeah, those bring in a nice level of interaction too. There are some ships that allow, for instance, I might take a ship that Jeremy had kind of ignored or not paid attention to, and it lets me, whenever he mines, he has to give me one of his things if he beats me in the bidding process. So that, like I said earlier, brings a whole nother layer of interesting strategy in the bidding process because I didn't want to win those bids, but I needed to place because if I completely lost, it didn't happen. So it was this really interesting place where I had to get right there in the middle between the other 2 players.
The only negative I would say about the game is that the typeset in this game is really small. If you have any problems reading, the text is really small on the player boards, on the cards themselves. So it's a game that players are going to be constantly leaning over, moving cards around to see what that does. Maybe some iconography could have helped it a little bit. However, that's a small nitpick. This game is really, really good. It's got strong engine building. It's got really cool dynamics to it. The auction bidding aspect is perfect for this type of game.
Yeah, and it's a lot of game for a fairly small footprint. I mean, there's a lot of things going on here, but it's a nice, tight little game with a lot of gameplay.
Yeah, if you guys are interested, go check this one out. It's called Exodus Fleet. believe it's coming out at Essen. If you guys have questions about the game, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and everything else that we do here at Man vs. Meeple, and we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.
Season 2 of Man vs. Meeple is sponsored in part by Cool Stuff Inc. Cool stuff in stock at coolstuffinc.com.